This is Andrew Hall. You're listening to Dead Hand Radio, a podcast about the Cold War, its history, and the effects it had on our culture, technology, and the future of our world. My guest for this episode of Dead Hand Radio is Joe Kent, Director of Education for the National Atomic Testing Museum in Las Vegas, Nevada. The National Atomic Testing Museum, NATM, is a national science, history, and educational institution that tells the story of America's nuclear weapons testing program at the Nevada test site. The museum's focus is to preserve, consolidate, and make accessible to the public historical and archival records, films, photographs, testing and archaeological artifacts associated with the Nevada test site. The museum offers public tours, educational programs, guest lectures, and book signings for the purpose of raising awareness of the Nevada test site and the nation's nuclear weapons testing program. Welcome to Dead Hand Radio, Joe. Thanks for joining me today.
Hey, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. It's good to be here.
Great. So I'd like to start the conversation and talk about the National Atomic Testing Museum. That's the place where I first met you, and it's an amazing place. I really enjoyed my time there. I had been there, that was my second time or third time that I'd been there, but it had been years, probably decades since I was last there. When was the National Atomic Testing Museum established?
Well, first I want to thank you again for visiting us, and I'm glad you had a great time. Yeah, so the National Atomic Testing Museum was founded in 2005, and the focal point of the museum and the Nevada Test Site Historical Foundation, which is our parent organization, really focus on preserving and fostering public accessibility to the history associated with the test site and the nation's nuclear weapons program. And so that's really our goal, is to really help educate the public on the Nevada test site and nuclear testing history in general. So that is why we exist.
Excellent. And how long have you been with the museum, and what is your role?
So I'm the Director of Education, and this is actually my second stint with the museum. I was originally here from 2013 to 2016 as the Director of Education, and I came back last September back in the same role. I just couldn't stay away. I just wanted to come back and help really promote this discussion about nuclear testing history and the present and the future.
That's excellent. What originally got you interested in the nuclear testing program overall?
So honestly, I didn't have a lot of information about, beyond just what I learned in school and did research on my own. I really kind of fell into it. I was an intern with the museum in 2013 over the summer, and it's sort of a happenstance situation. And I had a great time. I was fascinated by the history, by the science, all the information that we talk about, and it just sort of, an opening came available, and they brought me aboard. And the rest, they say, is history. So it's been a wonderful experience.
So as an intern, were you studying in college anything to do with the nuclear industry?
So my background's actually history, mainly public history. I have my master's degree from University of Louisiana at Lafayette, and my bachelor in history, in art, from the Ohio Northern University. My master's from ULL and my bachelor's from ONU. And so really, like I said, focusing on public history, museum studies, wanting to one day work in a museum. And so we really didn't discuss nuclear testing or anything like that in school. It was sort of a happy accident that it came aboard, but mainly American history and public history is mainly what I studied.
Cool. So as the director of education there, what responsibilities do you have?
So it's kind of with as with most museums, you have to wear many hats. So my main goal, or my main focal points are, organizing field trips, supervising our volunteers, creating content for social media, putting together the educational events, the distinguished lecture series that we have, outreach, going out to the schools or going out to different conventions or conferences, representing the museum in that way. Also going out and giving talks at different places. So it's really a lot of different things that I do. It's kind of a catch-all, so to speak, in terms of the position, but it's great. It never the same. Never the same days, that's for sure. Everything's a little different. Always something exciting to look forward to.
Great, and you get to talk about one of the most fascinating topics ever, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's anytime you talk about it, whether it's talking about the interesting parts of the history in terms of kind of the strange tales from the test site and things like that, or just talking about the Manhattan Project or what the test site's doing today, you always have people just hanging on every word. It's just everybody is just fascinated by this topic. That is for sure.
Yeah, it seems that way. It's something that sure has captivated me since I was a little kid.
No, what got you? Out of curiosity, I know you're interviewing me, but out of curiosity, what got you interested in the nuclear weapons history and the just Cold War in general?
Well, it's that my interest has been almost a lifelong interest in the nuclear weapons uh, area of this whole topic, and I guess it started as a fear when I was probably 7 or 8 years old, because this would have been like early 70s and right in the midst of the height of the Cold War and the ever-present threat of nuclear war with the Soviet Union. Being so young and being aware of that, it really made an impact on me. So growing up over the years, I've always had an interest in movies like Planet of the Apes,
Mhm.
a lot of science fiction movies that had anything to do with nuclear weapons or, um, war on a massive scale, world wars.
Mhm.
So I went into the Air Force, and yeah, I did a lot of studying off duty about the nuclear weapons, and I just always have had that interest. So recently, when I started my podcast, I felt like it was something that I could easily talk about.
Well, first, thank you for your service, and it's interesting to hear where people's love and interest comes from. It's for me, what I do, it's always fascinating because you have people from all different walks of life, all different backgrounds from around the world coming and all wanting to know more about it. And so it's just I always have to ask the question because it gives me a little bit of insight into you know what motivated you to start the podcast. It's good to hear.
Definitely, definitely. I appreciate you asking.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, so getting back to the museum, just a couple more questions. What are some of the major attractions that visitors can experience when they come to the museum?
Well, unquestionably, the most popular part about the experience visiting the museum is really the Ground Zero Theater. That is we have this theater that's made to look like a bunker, and you have these benches inside, and they are just made to look like the benches out at News Knob. Now, News Knob was out of the Nevada test site, which is now the Nevada National Security Site. And it's where VIPs, whether that's members of the press like Walter Cronkite or high-ranking military officers, you also had politicians who could be invited to come out to the site and sit on these benches and witness an atomic blast going off, or atomic bomb going off, I should say. And so it's the museum has that recreated spot right in the middle and of the tour. So you sit there and it's going to simulate what it would be like to actually watch one of those blasts out there. So you'd be about 7 to 9 miles away, typically watching one of these in person. And you'd be wearing these dark goggles. You couldn't see anything in front of your face. And you'd be required to sit down. And so what they would see is this initial flash. And you could see it through the goggles because what you're witnessing is brighter and hotter than the sun. So this is, everybody's accidentally looked at the sun before and got that, loss of vision for a little bit. And it's like that, but magnified. It could cause temporary blindness for a few hours, depending on how long you look at it. It could be longer. And so the initial flash happens, right? And then you start to see the wave of dirt and debris coming at you, just rushing towards you. And that's when you hear the boom. Of course, light travels faster than sound, and so it takes you a little bit to hear it. But when you do, you're also getting hit with all this dirt and debris from the blast. And then it eventually will come back from behind and do the same thing because everything is getting sucked up into the mushroom cloud. So it's creating a vacuum. Everything's getting sucked up in there and dispersed. And so that's what you can actually experience in our Ground Zero theater. The seats shake, air is getting blown at you, and it's recreating that experience. And we always have families, everyone different ages, all going away having a memorable time because of that. And it really sells how powerful these are. We had a gentleman we talked to who was invited to watch one of these tests, and he said that he agreed to wear the goggles, but he didn't want to sit down. He had, was on the bus coming out to the site and didn't want to be sitting down. And they said that's fine. Just warned him about the blast and that shockwave. And so he was looking and saw the flash and all of that. But when the shockwave came at him, he got knocked right onto his butt because of just the sheer force. And that's 7 to 9 miles away. So it really gives you an understanding of just how massive and powerful these weapons are.
Yeah, I appreciate that description of the experience of witnessing a nuclear blast. And I have to say, I did sit through the presentation at the Ground Zero Theater, and it was fantastic. I really enjoyed it.
There's nothing like it, right?
Yeah, it's really unique.
Absolutely.
I enjoyed it. But your description of witnessing a nuclear blast or a nuclear test is amazing. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. And it's one of the things that I really am so glad that we have, because one of the concerns of the museum, of the foundation, and just my personal concern is, getting into generations, and my generation, I'm an elder millennial, so to speak, is born in the late 80s. And so I haven't witnessed an atomic bomb going off. And so the biggest concern is, we're in this, eventually leaders in office are going to be from our generation who have never seen a bomb go off, and or atomic bomb go off. And you need to understand what comes with that and understand the destructive power. Always hear the line of, if you don't learn from the past, you're doomed to repeat it. And it's one of the biggest concerns is, are we going to make the same mistakes? Are we going to have a nuclear war that they feared about in the Cold War? And so having this, I feel like in some ways helps our audience better understand what an atomic bomb can really do. And throughout the museum, we try to sell that to them in terms of what is the capability of these weapons, because we don't want to see them used. A lot of the test site workers that we've talked to, and they've said that most of the people out at the site didn't want to see these weapons be used. It was a nuclear deterrent to avoid going to war, and a lot of them felt that they were doing their part to keep us out of a hot war with Soviet Union, now Russia. And I feel like we're kind of continuing that, showing people that this is something that we have to still talk about. We can't forget about the power of these weapons.
Absolutely. That's it seems like that's a primary role for the museum itself.
Absolutely. It's partially, reminding everyone about, what work was done at the site, also why the weapons shouldn't be used, but also to honor the individuals who worked out at the site, who gave a lot of themselves to ensure that we did stay out of hot wars. So we really try to honor the people who worked at the site, because there was a lot of long hours, blood, sweat, and tears that they put into it. So we always try to show our appreciation.
Yeah, living in the middle of the desert in a small town, was it Mercury where they lived?
So yeah, there was a little town of Mercury that was on the site. That's where even today, when you go on public tours or private tours, the bus goes to Mercury. It's where they would have the cafeteria and dormitories and all of those things. And it really depended on the person if they would stay at Mercury, if they would commute from Vegas. It's about 65 miles northwest of Las Vegas. So some would drive along the highway to get there. Some would stay there. It really depended on one, what was going on at the site at the time. Are they prepping for big tests the next day? Maybe they need to stay over. Or if maybe they're a bachelor and didn't have, really any family in the area, so maybe they just stayed there at Mercury. So it oftentimes really just depended. We do have a lot of people that we've talked to who just commuted every day. I usually carpooled and went to the site. So,
And I'm sorry, I jumped forward a little bit, but I'd like to get back to the museum for a minute.
yeah, absolutely.
Are there any other features or uh, attractions that visitors can experience when they go in there that stand out? I mean, there's a ton of information in there, which is it'll take you hours if you walk through there and try to consume all of that in one pass.
Well, that's for sure. And I know individuals like yourself, we talk to a lot of people when they come in, of course, greeting them to the museum. And one of the questions is, how long, is it going to take me to go through? And we always say it really depends on your interest level. And for someone like you, I'm sure you were probably here for a few hours because of the content there. But I think some of the standouts for me, just things that your general public would be interested in is, we have a piece of the Berlin Wall, which we're one of only two places in Las Vegas that has it on display. And so it's very much prominent towards the end of the museum when we talk about the end of the Cold War, and then into what's being done today at the site. And we also have one of the I-beams from one of the World Trade Center towers after the September 11th terrorist attacks. And the reason we have that, because we do get people who are surprised to see it, and it's because following the terrorist attacks, there was a first responder training that was expanded upon, and they actually have terrorist response training, radiological training out at the Nevada National Security Site to help first responders have the best tools to respond to a possible attack. And so that's why we have that to kind of to introduce that topic. It's something that, in fact, they used to come to the museum prior to their week-long training, but they have an entire area out there where they take them through this rigorous training using Geiger counters, and so that if they need to find radioactive objects or you need to locate something like that, it's a great training that they get. And that's first responders from around the country. We get people from New York and the Midwest and all of that. So it's a pretty cool um, part of the security portion of what they do out there, and so that's why we have the I-beam. And so it's really special to see people from all, like I mentioned earlier, all backgrounds. Everybody treats it with a lot of respect, and you get this solemn feeling as you see people go by it, and it's one of the highlights for sure. Just really selling that mission that the site has of security and keeping people safe. Constant reminder for us. And um, some of the other stuff that stand out, we always get a lot of people interested in the pop culture exhibit that we have, which really highlights the 1950s period where atomic was really synonymous with cool. And so we have a lot of objects like a yearbook from Las Vegas High School. We have Fireball candies, which you can actually buy in our gift shop. We have books that they did, like they have little Christmas ornaments with the atomic symbol on it, a little atom on it, atomic toy guns, and there's um, a lab kit that kids could have played with when they were growing up. And so a lot of the pop culture exhibit really is a fun one for people of all ages. People who grew up in the era remember them, and the kids just find it so crazy. A lot of the stuff that they were, it's something that people don't expect to see when they come here, and so they always get a kick out of it. Some temporary stuff that we have right now, we have an art exhibit which features the art of Arthur Beaumont and Charles Bittinger, who were both naval artists with the U.S. Navy, and they were present for Operation Crossroads, which was a 1946 series of tests done out in the Pacific Ocean near the Marshall Islands, near Bikini Atoll and all of that. So they were commissioned by the Navy. Beaumont actually became the naval artist of the U.S. Navy, and they were actually painted these images they were seeing of the Baker and Able shots happening. So we have those on the walls, short descriptions on each of the paintings, and so it's really an art component to what we talk about, and that also really helps people really get what these weapons can do. So it's a pretty cool portion of it. Like I said, it's temporary, but we've had it for a few months, and we hope to have it for a few months more. So it's worth checking out. These haven't been on display together, I think, since late 1940s.
Every one of those attractions that you just mentioned were outstanding, and there were so many more. I guess it would be hard to pick which handful of attractions in the museum were really stand out, because you didn't even mention some of the devices that are in there, and I'm not going to give away too much. People should just go see it. All the science, there's a ton of science from atomic, from the beginnings of the atomic era to the geology of what's going on out there at the test site. I didn't even know when you mentioned the uh, the new responsibilities and the new mission of the test site. What is it called again?
So it's officially the Nevada National Security Site.
Right. Yeah, I didn't even know that. I thought it was still called the test site. So they have a new mission, and they're still continuing on with their contribution to the security of our country, which is great to hear.
Absolutely, and I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions when we get visitors to the museum is that just like when I was in school, I didn't even know about the testing that happened after the Manhattan Project. We really didn't learn about it, and I think so. In my mind, prior to coming here, it stopped after the Manhattan Project. And so we do get a lot of people who come and think that once the test site stopped testing nuclear weapons, that it sort of just ended. But yeah, they continue to focus on security and helping protect the country. So it's still going, and still has a lot of great work that they're doing out there.
That's great. And it's hard to separate the role of the museum and the test site itself because they're so integral with one another.
Hmm.
But last question about the museum itself. Aside from coming to the museum and geeking out over all the cool stuff you guys have in there, how could somebody, if they wanted to, how could somebody get involved with volunteering or doing something to contribute to the cause of the museum?
I really appreciate you asking that question. We're always looking for volunteers, absolutely, and they could reach out to me. It's Joe Kent at NATM NV as in Nevada.org. So joe.kent at NATM NV.org, and that'll go straight to me, and I'll respond to them, and we'll have a discussion about how they can volunteer and what kind of options we have. We always can use help, whether it's through research, giving tours, or helping out with events and in the stores. So we're always looking for volunteers.
Cool. So we'll travel back in history a little bit to the beginning of this whole atomic era and talk a little bit about the Manhattan Project and the first atomic bombs. June 1942 marks the beginning of the Manhattan Project. Prior to that, a very important correspondence took place that led to the development of that program. What was the role Albert Einstein had in development of the project? Let me rephrase that a little bit. A lot of people think or consider Albert Einstein the father of the atomic bomb, and that's totally not true. But he did have a role in the development of that program.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you hit the nail right on the head. It's we get a lot of people coming to the museum. Like I said, there's misconceptions with the atomic bomb, and especially Manhattan Project. And yeah, Einstein's role in the actual project was quite minimal, and it often surprises the people that come through the doors. As you mentioned, he did play an important role, and that was in helping inform the U.S. government about the need for such a program. And that was in 1939. There were a lot of scientists around the world, including Einstein, who were concerned about the discovery of fission that were done by German scientists Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann. And these scientists feared that Nazi Germany would use uranium being mined by the Belgians to develop a fission bomb. And so Einstein met with fellow physicists Leo Szilard, Eugene Wigner, and Edward Teller to draft a letter warning President Roosevelt about the possible threat posed by the Germans. So Szilard wrote the letter, Einstein edited, signed, and forwarded it to the president. And they really turned to Einstein because of his notoriety. Even back in 39, people knew who Einstein was. He was a rock star of science, right? So people knew who he was. And so that helped these scientists, really get the attention of Roosevelt. Now, it still was another few years until the Manhattan Project was started, but this really brought it to the attention of the president.
Right. And there was a lot of, I think it was a pretty sobering letter for FDR to receive. And he did respond to Einstein. And from my recollection, he said that, yeah, we're going to do something about it. Thanks for letting us know. Basically, that kind of summarizes it. But then they did move forward with the program, kept it highly secret, and there was multiple sites. It wasn't just one site in Alamogordo like a lot of people think. There was multiple sites.
Yeah, absolutely. There were three primary sites, but you had factories all over the country involved. They did experiment under the the University of Chicago under their Stagg Field, which is when they first were able to have the nuclear chain reaction. So, that's an example. You have Hanford in Washington. They produced the plutonium that was used in the Trinity test and also used for to build Fat Man. You have Oak Ridge in Washington. Hanford in Washington and Oak Ridge in Tennessee. In Oak Ridge, Tennessee, they had the Y-12 plant, which was used to make enriched uranium. So those are just some of the big sites. But you also, of course, had Los Alamos Laboratory, now the Los Alamos National Laboratory, who was really where the science was, all the calculations were taking place, the development of the bombs themselves. So it was a massive undertaking for the United States. And it was Roosevelt, of course, who authorized the Office of Scientific Research and Development and the Army Corps of Engineers to establish the Manhattan Engineer District, and of course to form the Manhattan Project. And so, and what's I think most amazing is that after it was revealed what the Manhattan Project was up to and what was being done, it shocked the American people. They had no clue. And I think nobody expected it to something of that magnitude to be kept secret for that long. So you had a lot of people where it was very much compartmentalized. And even the name Manhattan Project was created to make it people think, oh, it was just something for the war that was being done. There's programs all over the country, getting factories to produce tanks and all of the other, needs for the war effort. And so, the term Manhattan Engineer District, Manhattan Project, all of those things. And while, of course, there were things going in Manhattan in terms of, office space and things like that, the name itself was purposely kept vague to keep people thinking it was just something for the war and not nuclear, developing a nuclear bomb.
Is Alamogordo associated with the Manhattan Project, or is it Los Alamos Labs?
So it's Los Alamos Labs, and Alamogordo was where the Trinity test took place.
Yeah.
So the Alamogordo bombing and gunnery range is about, I want to say it's like 230 miles from where the lab was, and then that was the bombing and gunnery range was about 218 miles away from Santa Fe. So you're talking about just in New Mexico, there's a lot of land being covered just from that. So.
And do you have any idea how many people worked on the program?
Yeah, absolutely. At its height, there were about 130,000 workers across the different complexes. And of course, like we mentioned, there's factories, plants, scientists, engineers, all of that. So 130,000 workers across the country. And by the end of it, the government actually spent about, I think it was over $2 billion. And you're talking about, 1945. So, you could imagine how much that would be in today's economy.
Do you want to talk about the goal of the program, or should we just skip forward and talk about the test?
No, we can definitely talk about the goal of the program. As we were talking about earlier with, the concern of the scientists, sending the letter signed by Einstein. The big concern was Nazi Germany getting a hold of the fission bomb. And the main goal of the Manhattan Project was to develop a nuclear weapon before Nazi Germany could get their hands on it. And so that was what all the resources were being pulled for. And, obviously they were able to successfully test it, used it twice during wartime. And this is something that was straight out of science fiction. It also, I was talking about earlier about how initially the atomic bomb was popular, and that was partially because it was something that people couldn't even fathom, and it was just an interesting the science behind it was fascinating. The whole process, the fact that everything was kept so secret, of course, it just interested, everybody was interested in it. So that was part of the reason for that early popularity. But yeah, so the main goal was to develop that weapon.
And you touched on the idea that this was straight out of science fiction, and it actually was. I think it did have roots in science fiction, because there were writers that were writing about atomic weapons before they even had developed these destructive weapons.
You're absolutely right, and I'm glad you brought that up. It's true. It was actually out of science fiction. Really amazing thing to look back at that and realize how influential those authors were on what we're doing with our technology today, going to Mars, landing on the moon, these sorts of things that seemed like they were it seemed like they were never going to be possible. And the fact that they actually came to pass, it's just amazing.
Yeah. July 16, 1945 is a significant day in history. It was the day of the world's first atomic explosion. And we're coming up on the 75th anniversary of that date. What was the name of the device?
Yep, you're absolutely right. So the name of the test was Trinity. So it's oftentimes considered the Trinity test, but the actual device that was used and detonated was called Gadget. And so that's actually the term of the device that was exploded. And we have an upcoming exhibit. I know we'll talk about that later, but we actually have a model of what Gadget looked like.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it's just this ball with wires and everything else. So it's something else when you look at it compared to what would come later. As you know, visiting the museum, these weapons get smaller and smaller and more powerful. And so going from something like that, which just is a massive ball with all these wires and cables on it, it's pretty amazing to see it.
Yes. So a massive ball, like you said, with wires hanging off, it didn't even resemble a bomb.
No.
Suspended from a metal tower in the middle of the desert. And did the scientists even know what was going to happen when they lit that thing?
So they had the calculations from the mathematicians in terms of how hot it would be and how the brightness and things like that. But in terms of the actual yield, nobody really could predict it. You had several mathematicians working on trying to figure out how powerful is this thing going to be. And they even actually had a bet going on. They were all throwing in numbers that they thought would be, and they weren't really, none of them were really close. So, but yeah, the calculations, they were able to determine a lot about it, but really not about the power. And that's really why they tested it to begin with, is they needed to understand what are we looking at with the explosive power of this weapon. And so the yield ended up being in about 21,000 kilotons, or 21 kilotons, I'm sorry, which is equivalent. We always compare it to tons of TNT. So 21 kilotons would be equivalent of 21,000 tons of TNT. So just a massively powerful weapon. And you really compare us to the bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki. They were about the same. They were both similar in terms of their design, and they were also very similar in the yield of the bomb.
And even I read a letter from one of the scientists to one of the generals before they carried out that mission, and they still didn't know what the yield was going to be at that point.
Yeah, it's surprising, right? You would imagine that they had at least some base level, but yeah, it was just they were just like, well, we have to test it to find out, and so that's what they did. And like I mentioned earlier, That was about Alamogordo Bombing and Gunnery Range was about 230 miles from Los Alamos, and so you can actually visit, I believe, twice a year. You can visit the Trinity site. It's only open a couple times a year.
Yeah. Is it true that there's melted sand that looks like glass out there?
So there's what's called Trinitite, and Trinitite is just like you're talking about. It's sand that basically is superheated and becomes Trinitite. And I'm glad you brought it up. It's another thing you can buy in our gift shop. So Trinitite is, it's all from the Trinity site, all from the test, and it's actually available for purchase. It's totally safe, and it's nothing to be concerned about. I know we get a lot of questions about radiation, but it's completely safe. And it's there's only so much Trinitite, so it's a pretty cool little souvenir to have when you leave.
Yeah, for sure. Is that the only way to create Trinitite, by having a nuclear explosion?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's the only way. And that's truly why it's called Trinitite, and just because it was something that was so unique to an atomic bomb. Just the sheer temperature, like the thermal energy being released from that bomb, is superheated to the fact that it becomes its own unique substance.
So I collected a couple of statistics from my study on this in preparation for the interview. And one of the things that surprised me was that the blast was 4 times hotter than the sun. Now, how did they measure that?
So I'm not quite sure on the, how they actually came up with the calculations. I know that was from the mathematicians. They, through their formulas, they were able to calculate that. But yeah, it was definitely hotter than the sun, and you can imagine.
Let's just call it magic. They
Right.
did magic.
It certainly feels like it, absolutely.
Yeah, right.
And it really, it really also makes you think with these early bombs. They would go on to build and test bigger ones in terms of the yield, in terms of how far they could be seen, and really what effects it could have. So the fact that what you're talking about with 4 times hotter than the sun, just imagine these later much bigger nuclear tests.
Right. Later bombs would be measured in the megatons, which is isn't that 1 million tons?
It'd be yep. So whenever we say, because there's the largest the United States ever tested out in the Pacific, there was the largest was 15 megatons, so 15 million tons of TNT equivalent. There's a quote that we have on one of our panels in the museum, which says that he was just looking at watching this go on and say it makes these earlier tests look like they were firecrackers in comparison. And it was something that it was a different level compared to what came before.
Yeah. Yeah, because the destructive force doesn't increase incrementally. It increases exponentially at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So back to the Trinity test. They call it Trinity, and a lot of people think that the bomb itself was named Trinity, but that's actually the test site. Now, we talked about the destructive capabilities of that particular explosion, the Trinity test, and there was a quite famous quote by Robert Oppenheimer after that event. Can you tell me what that is?
So yeah, the quote you're talking about is "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds," which was from Hindu scripture, and it's interesting. Through our research, it's Oppenheimer said that during his recollections, reflecting on it, and his brother actually said that during. While they're watching, his brother Frank was a physicist. They were standing by each other when it was being tested, and he recalls his brother. He calls Oppie, saying it worked. But in his reflections, he did say, "Now I am become death, destroyer of worlds." just being reminded of that scripture, just the devastating power of the weapon itself.
And I've heard that recording of him saying that, and he sounded quite distressed
Mm-hmm.
when he made that comment.
Yeah, it's one of those. He's certainly of a lot of the scientists, you know, he looked back on it, and you know, speaking about the journey coming out, the genie coming out of the bottle, and yeah, I mean, he did later in life absolutely have some, I don't know if you would call it regret, but certainly had some concerns about what occurred after that initial test.
Well, that's a great segue to the next part of this. August 1945, two more atomic bombs were detonated, this time on civilian populations, and resulted in massive casualties. But also, it resulted in the surrender of the Japanese army, which effectively ended the war in the Pacific. These two cities were designated as industrial military targets despite being heavily populated with civilians. Do you know what the total number of casualties was?
So it's with the attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it's really hard to pinpoint numbers because it depends on what you're looking at. So what we say, we look at the death toll in terms of the initial attack. So from the initial blast itself, and we're looking at about 250,000 between the two of them. And of course, you have to account for resulting deaths from radiological health effects and all of that. So you're looking at, later throughout the decades, the people sadly dying from those different diseases and things like that, and just whether it be the burns or cancer or things like that, it's, those are all part of it. But when we talk about the attack itself, we talk about those the initial death toll from that first attack. And so we look at it about 250,000.
Okay. Fortunately, those were the only two times that these weapons were used against humans. Unfortunately, it did result in massive casualties. Do you know why they chose to detonate two bombs and not just one?
Absolutely. And one thing I would like to point out too, and of course, you never want to see any loss of life at all. And while we talk about the health effects, of the Japanese people following the attacks and throughout the decades, part of the reason they decided to drop these two weapons is Truman and his advisors viewed it as a better alternative to a invasion of Japan, which would have been codenamed Operation Downfall. They had planned to invade the main island in Japan, and their estimated death tolls would be was 1 million, upwards of 1 million American deaths and 3 million Japanese deaths. And that's because multiple times the Japanese government had said that they would fight to the last man. And there was a concern that, and they already started pulling back troops prior to the planned invasion. So they knew that they were starting to hunker down in, on mainland Japan. So that would have been the alternative. And Truman had to make the decision of, do we want to lose upwards of 1 million American lives and have a even more drawn out war? Or do we want to use this weapon to minimize the casualty rate and quickly end the war? So obviously not a desirable position to be in, especially since Truman knew about the weapon for about 6 months prior to making that call. 3 months into his term as vice president, he, after the day after Roosevelt passed away, is when he learned about the Manhattan Project. And then 3 months later was told, okay, we have to decide if we're going to use this or not. So we had 3 months being aware of the actual Manhattan Project to make that decision. So not an easy one at all. So in terms of why they dropped 2 bombs, the first bomb was dropped in Japan on August 6th, 1945. And 3 days later, on August 9th, they dropped the bomb on Nagasaki. And so they actually had 3 bombs built to use. They had hoped after the first one that the Japanese would surrender. And after 3 days, the Japanese didn't surrender, so they opted to drop the second weapon on Nagasaki. And that resulted in, of course, Japanese surrender of World War II. But they had a third weapon, but the Japanese surrender came before that was deployed. So they waited, were hoping for a response of surrender, but when they didn't get that, and they gave warning about the second attack, and when they didn't hear anything from the Japanese, they struck Nagasaki.
That's a good explanation. I wasn't aware that the Japanese were offered an opportunity to surrender between the 2 attacks.
I believe they were warned before the first. Let them know that we have a powerful weapon that we're going to use, and that's obviously paraphrasing, and dropped the first bomb, gave them an opportunity. 3 days had passed, and that's when they decided to use the second.
One little piece of data that I came across that was interesting to me, and I think not a lot of people realize this, is that when those bombs are dropped, they don't actually hit the ground. They're detonated 1,000 to 2,000 feet above the ground. And why is that?
So yeah, absolutely. And a lot of the weapons, especially at the Nevada test site, would have been on towers for the atmospheric or above ground tests. And the reason for that is that you maximize the blast radius. If you would hit the ground, it would only blast out from the top. But if you're detonating it above, it maximizes the damage caused by the blast. So you'd actually maximize what it could do when it's high up there like that.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense, because you're basically effectively cutting your explosion in half by letting half of it go into the ground, right?
Absolutely. And we were talking about the release of radiation and the health problems that a lot of the Japanese people would have had. The goal of these atomic bombs were the blast damage and not necessarily the radiation. The radiation was a secondary effect from the bomb in terms of what the goal was. The goal was always to destroy these, as you said, these strategic sites. So that goal was always that initial blast and the damage it caused.
Right. Even though they were well aware of the effects of the radiation, they had no idea how long-term or actually what kind of problems that would create for people.
Absolutely. A lot of their knowledge of, in terms of the radiation and what, long-term, like you're saying, health effects and all of that, they didn't really know. It's why we kept testing afterwards to learn more about these weapons, learn more about radiation, how to contain, how to mitigate a lot of that. And so this was a brand new frontier. So there was a lot that they really didn't know. There were a lot of different positions on what it was going to look like on the long term, short term. It was something that they were learning as they were doing.
Yeah. Well, if there's a silver lining I don't really see it as a silver lining, but they did do a lot of scientific uh, investigation on those effects as a result of this, and I don't know if that led into the use of radio radi, radiation as a treatment to certain cancers, um, or if it led to the use of X-rays as a way to diagnose medical conditions, but it certainly gave them some good information that they could use in the medical industry.
Well, absolutely. We were talking earlier, you and I, about the different things to see at the museum, and one of them, it talks about Bren Tower, which is Bear Reactor Experiment, Nevada, and it was a basically a freestanding um, reactor that would release radiation. And they use this tower is actually larger than Empire State Building, and they used it to help um, get information for the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, determining radiation health effects, learning how much radiation, how much a lot of radiation can you be exposed to in a year, safety levels for workers, what doctors should look for, how they could treat these individuals. So, and what the experiment did is with that reactor, it released radiation onto this mock Japanese village, and it determined how much radiation was able to penetrate the buildings themselves. So if a person was indoors at the time of the attack, they were exposed to this much. If they were outside, they were exposed to this much. And like I said, able to determine how much radiation causes A, B, and C, what kind of treatments that would help, safety levels for the test site workers. And so that program was a huge help in giving more information for all these organizations around the world that that assisted with the recovery, as well as the Japanese government and physicians and that sort of thing. So, but you're right. I mean, it's hard to say there's a silver lining to something like this. It's no question that it was catastrophic, and all the loss of life is heartbreaking, and it's unfortunate.
The Japanese surrender effectively ended the World War, which at that time, the war in Europe was finished up, winding down, and they were already starting reparations in Germany and the other countries that were affected by that. There was already, I mean, even though that war ended, there was already mistrust and suspicion growing between the Soviet Union and their Western counterparts. Can you speak a little bit about that?
So what I can definitely say is, I think, especially once the war ended, there are ideological differences between the Soviet Union and the United States at the time. And so while they were unified against a common enemy, once that common enemy was defeated, they did have a lot of mistrust, and they did look at each other as enemies. And I think that really came to a head in 1949 when the Soviet Union tested their first nuclear weapon. And there's always going to be people that view the start date of the Cold War as different years, or they might not necessarily agree on the start of it. I always look at it as 1949 because that is when their first nuclear test took place, and that's when everything changed. Is a year later, Truman established or approved the establishment of a continental test site in Nevada, and recognizing the need for a site on mainland U.S. where they could test year round. And because there were definitely there were definitely concerns about testing in the Pacific after the Soviets tested their first atomic bomb. You had the Korean War started. You had, of course, the Soviet Union now had the bomb. There was concern being out in the Pacific, as we talked about earlier. We alluded to it with the art exhibit that we have. But in 1946, a year after the end of World War II, we tested Operation Crossroads. Able and Baker were the two shots that were detonated, and that was in the Marshall Islands out in the Pacific Ocean. And that was really the first designated proving ground or testing site of the U.S. And that's where they ended up testing their largest above ground or atmospheric tests. But once the Korean War started, once the Soviet Union started testing their nuclear weapons, it already added more concerns on top of what they already had. It was expensive to take a lot of that equipment out to the Pacific Ocean. It was humid, not very accessible. You had to fly everything out, and so or by boat. So you're dealing with a lot of spending just to test in the Pacific. So with the security concerns, the financial concerns, they felt it was necessary to have a continental testing site. And so that's when Truman actually approved it. There were a couple finalists for that site. In addition to the Las Vegas bombing and gunnery range, which part of it became the Nevada test site, they also had the Dugway Proving Ground out in Utah, White Sands Proving Ground in New Mexico, and lastly, and the one that surprises people the most was Camp Lejeune out in North Carolina. So while in the Nevada test site, you would make sure that it would go away from Las Vegas. Out in Camp Lejeune, the plan would have been to have it go out to the Atlantic. But it was too populated.
Yeah, even with all the safeguards, once that continental test site was established, they still had they were still not able to predict where that fallout would go, and it did, in cases, irradiate several towns in Utah, as far as I know.
One of the one people know best is St. George, and we recently talked to people who knew of friends and family where they grew up there, and watching the tests occur and going outside and witnessing it, but knowing family members and friends who sadly got sick, and that's, you're talking about an area that was far less populated than out in North Carolina. So you could imagine that was one of the big factors why they didn't choose North Carolina. Ultimately, Las Vegas bombing and gunnery range was selected due to its desirable climate. At the time, Las Vegas had only about 25,000 people. So that area of the state was pretty sparsely populated. It also ended up being advantageous in terms of location to the laboratories. So Sandia, Los Alamos, Lawrence Livermore, you're looking at New Mexico and California. So Nevada being right there and the site right there, it actually made a lot of sense because they could take that in there for a lot less than it would take to move everything out to the Pacific.
Just a couple of points of data. The Nevada test site was established in 1951, and it was host to 100 above ground and 828 underground nuclear tests between the years of 1951 and 1992. It looks like a lunar landscape. There's so many, it looks like it was hit by meteors. There's so many craters in that area.
Absolutely, and your numbers are correct. Yeah, 100 above ground, 828 underground. The site itself grew from 680 square miles initially to about 1,375 square miles today. So it's actually slightly larger than the state of Rhode Island. So it's a massive site, and definitely the biggest of the testing grounds for these weapons. And it's funny that you mentioned that it looks like the moon, because they actually hosted some of the Apollo astronauts from the different Apollo training for the different training missions, and they actually came to the site and used the rover and did some of their training on what to expect when they got to the moon, because of all the craters, which are all from underground testing. So that would have been, I believe, the 70s, I think, is when those from the different Apollo missions.
Wow. Interesting. So how heavily irradiated is that whole area?
So I don't have the numbers in front of me now, but they do have public tours out at the site. So obviously right now that's been halted, but you can sign up for public tours out to the site, and they take you around to the different craters, into the different tunnels, all the different areas. Obviously not a lot of the stuff that they do now, which is still secret, but they do take you to areas that they can. So it's not dangerous levels. A lot of it is alpha level radiation, which as long as you're not ingesting it, it is not going to be dangerous.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, the number of above ground tests. So obviously the radiation levels decline over time. I've always thought that, if there was a nuclear war, the Earth would be irradiated forever, and I think that might be misconception.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's the radiation will eventually get. There'll be radiation, but it will eventually get to the levels where it's safe. Um, and even if it's not, you'll be able to take the precautions. One of the big things is when an atomic bomb is detonated, it releases gamma radiation, which is going to be intense. It's going to be able to to be able to penetrate the skin and all of that, but it doesn't last as long as, say, alpha or beta does. And with alpha radiation, which lasts the longest, it's only ever really dangerous if you ingest it. So if you see people with masks and things like that, that's the only way they're really going to be affected by that alpha, is if they're drinking it or breathing it in or whatever. That gamma radiation is going to be the initial very intense radiation released, but it's also not going to last as long. So we always talked about the different precautions for radiation, which is time, distance, and shielding. The longer you're exposed, the more it's going to affect you. The further you get away from it, the safer you'll be. And then also how you're protecting yourself. And so with alpha, how you can protect yourself is just your skin or piece of paper, mask. Then you get to beta, and you're talking aluminum foil. And then you get into X-rays, which of course you have the lead being the big protective barrier there. So at the dentists, I give the leaded vinyl to cover you with that to help protect. And then when you get into gamma, you're looking at concrete and that kind of protection. That's why you see a lot of bunkers being built of concrete that's going to protect you from that very intense radiation. And they found after Hiroshima and Nagasaki that buildings made of concrete were not only did they able to protect from the radiation, but they also withstood the blast better. And so they started looking at that in the test in Operation Crossroads that I was mentioning. They actually had a concrete repair dock that they tested to see what would happen, and it survived both tests. So concrete is what protects the best from gamma radiation.
The concrete that is able to withstand the blast and absorb or resist the penetration of the gamma radiation, will that concrete absorb that gamma radiation and store it?
I know it'll at least block the radiation, but I don't know if it necessarily absorbs or stores it.
So yeah, that's great information. A lot of people that I communicate with on Twitter, um, they're kind of like me. They're into the science fiction part of it, the post-apocalyptic movies and literature that have been written based on nuclear wars and stuff like that. They will find that segment of this podcast fascinating. The project, I just wanted to like throw this out there for people. The selection process of determining that Nevada would be the test site for the continental U.S. Was given a specific name. What was that?
Nutmeg, which is always whenever you talk to people about it when we talk to them in the museum, it's always something that they laugh. They're like, it's Project Nutmeg, and the some of the names are amusing that they used for some of the tests. Once they stopped using the Able Baker and all of that, you would have a series of tests named after types of cheeses or different tools, things like that. So it's always interesting. We actually have a panel that lists all the different names of the tests, and so yeah, you'll have all different types of tests all following a pattern of the series, and they'll just pick a random top category and then name the test individual things falling in that category. I think one of the cheese ones was Jarlsberg, I think was one of them, things like that. So yeah, it's pretty interesting part of it.
The reality is they chose Nevada, and that's where they did a lot of this testing. It was instrumental in the fight against Soviet expansionism, which they did have a real agenda to take over the world, or at least move communism into as many corners of the world as they possibly could. And the Nevada test site had a key role to play in fending off those threats by the Soviet Union.
Absolutely. And I was listening to some of your podcasts the other day, and I know you talked about MAD, mutually assured destruction. One of the questions we get a lot of from people coming to the museum, and we get people, might surprise your listeners to know that some people that come visit the museum are absolutely against the bomb, and some people are, felt that we did what was necessary, and having grown up during the Cold War, felt that it kept us out of a hot war. But we're open to have those conversations with people. Our staff and our foundation members, we all come from different backgrounds and different views on it. And so we're always open to have those conversations. But one thing that we get a lot of questions about is, why did we keep testing? And the best way to say that is because once we tested it and then used it in wartime, and then especially after the Soviet Union tested their first bomb, is that we understood that if we got behind it all in the technology and the science and of how to build these weapons, that we could be left unprotected and be left susceptible to a possible attack by the Soviet Union. And of course, other countries ended up testing weapons themselves. United Kingdom, of course, France, China came later. Places like India and Pakistan tested their own nuclear weapons. Some in the 90s after the U.S. stopped testing. So, but yeah, mutually assured destruction played a big role in the amount of tests being done at the Nevada test site. Each series, you could have 10, sometimes 10 or more detonations. And that's because for the labs who are actually developing these nuclear weapons, they have to test more than once in order to understand, is this a fluke? Is this, how are we going to see if a device, or a design is effective, and they had to test multiple times. So oftentimes, each design of a new weapon, and there were plenty, would have to be tested at least 10 times. And a lot of that was if like I said, if we stopped testing and if we lagged behind at all in the technology, the science of nuclear weapons, that would give our enemies, so to speak, the Soviets, their advantage to attack. I mean, your podcast name alludes to the concern on both sides about a possible attack, right? So this idea of like, we need to make sure that we're on the cutting edge, and that's what kept us out of war. Both sides recognized it. There was a distrust that, you could have said, oh, we'll stop testing, and if they kept going, then that puts us in a unique and difficult position, and likewise for them. So you had that mutually assured destruction, absolutely, where in order to keep neck and neck and assure that one side won't attack the other, we had to keep testing, because what, like I said, comes down to mistrust in a lot of ways, and that eventually changed, especially when you get to the 80s. You start having more open discussions between the two countries, leading to an actual joint test. I don't know if you get a chance to see that when you were here, but in 1988, there was a joint verification experiment that was done between the United States and the Soviet Union. And I'm jumping ahead a little bit because I know we're going to go back to underground testing. But the two countries worked together on this test called Kearsarge. The United States representatives of the testing program going to their testing site, and representatives of their testing site coming to the test site in Nevada and working on this project together. And that was because they wanted to, one, assure that we were all following the Limited Test Ban Treaty, which is what moved testing underground, but also as a way to kind of ease tensions and as an act of, as a goodwill to each other. And it really started, the two countries started to see eye to eye a bit in terms of the need to stop testing.
Yeah, there's a lot of points I'd like to make in response to your to what you just said, but I'm going to take it back to the distrust era between the Soviets and the U.S. and why the U.S. continued testing, because you made some good points, and I want to just want to expound on that. The Soviets developed the world's largest nuclear weapon called the Tsar Bomba. Mm-hmm. And are you familiar with that?
Yes, it was 50 megatons, which I mentioned earlier. Ours was 15 megatons. Theirs was 50. So it was, I believe, the United States looked at it as, we don't want to outdo that. And that's really the culmination, a lot of the concerns worldwide, from all sorts of different groups, where there was a concern about fallout in the atmosphere, about the tests becoming bigger and bigger and putting people at risk. And that was really when it came to a boiling point in terms of this is getting out of hand in a lot of people's minds. And so 50 megatons is massive.
As we talked about, that the destructive power doesn't increase incrementally, it increased exponentially. So what were you going to say about the explosion?
Oh, I was going to say it. I believe, based on what I've researched, is that it burned a hole temporarily into the ozone layer.
Yes, that's what I read also. Yeah.
So it's that, I think if anything sells just how powerful this weapon was, it would be that. The fact that it was such the heat and the blast power of it were off the scale.
And from what I read, that wasn't the Soviets didn't plan to stop at that point. They had one that was in development for 100 megatons they decided not to go forward with it once they saw what the 50 megaton did.
Well, yeah, I think everybody was looking at it as, we do want to make sure that the pilots and the that are dropping these weapons for testing can get away. We talk about how when these blasts initially are or when these bombs are initially detonated, you're talking about milliseconds that everything is occurring. So in order to get away, it's the bigger the bomb, the faster everything unfolds. And so, you want to make sure that pilot, whoever, can get away from the blast itself. So I think a lot of people thought, we got the gist in terms of the power. So.
Well, and who knows what would have happened if they had detonated 100 megaton. That, there was speculation at some point that it could ignite the atmosphere, turn the world into a ball of flame. That's just way beyond reason to go that big.
And I think it shows you like just how amazing it was that both sides ended up actually being able to be at the same table and work on a test together, because that level of testing, you're talking about like I said, a whole different level than what is being tested previously. So the fact that they were able to put aside their differences and come to the table and work on tests and come to some agreement is pretty amazing.
Yeah. And now testing is non-existent except in rogue states like North Korea. Possibly, well, Iran supposedly doesn't have the bomb yet, but once they do, they're going to want to test it.
And for your listeners who are interested, on our website, our executive director has written a lot about what's been going on in the news with North Korea. And so there are several articles by him talking about what's been happening, and also talking about it from his, our perspective as a nuclear testing museum. So that's definitely worth checking out, because it takes what we have learned from the past and putting it and using it as and analyze what the North Koreans are doing.
Is that Michael Hall?
Yes. Yeah.
I met him as well. I met him the day I met you. So we'll talk a little bit about the underground testing, because there was actually way more underground tests conducted than what the above ground testing consisted of. When did they actually move the testing underground?
So the nuclear the limited test ban treaty was put into effect in 1963. So that's when they decided to move all testing underground, and that was signed by United Kingdom, United States, the Soviet Union, and the goal of that was to prevent more radiation from being released. There was concern about the fallout. We talked about St. George and areas like that, and they really wanted to make a concerted effort because there was concerns about strontium-90 and all of the other health effects from the release of this radiation. And so it was a joint decision to move testing underground. And like I mentioned, that was 1963. And that came after, as we were talking about, where there was a temporary treaty that ended in 1962. So so that's what led to underground testing as a whole.
Okay. Now, did they have to build a bunch of tunnels under there? Or, I mean, I saw some mock-ups of excavating equipment. It looked like they had massive amounts of tunnels underground for that to conduct those tests. How massive is that facility underground?
So yeah, so the main types of underground tests are the weapons effects tests, which were done in shafts dug vertically, and then you also had the tunnel tests, which were horizontal tests. The vertical tests were just weapons tests. And so those were the vertical ones done in those shafts. And then the horizontal tests done in the tunnels were the weapons effects tests. So the vertical tests were to determine the power, the yield, to get all of the diagnostics and record all the information from the blast itself. And the horizontal tests were to see the effects of the blast and radiation on military hardware. So those are the different kinds. So we look at it as the vertical weapons development tests, and then the horizontal weapons effects tests. You would have more of the vertical weapons development tests. And those would typically be, you're looking at anywhere from, the bomb would be anywhere from 800 to 2,200 feet underground. So it took a lot of changes to the testing process in order to really convert to underground testing. You had massive cranes and drilling rigs and all of that. So you have this creation of these diagnostic testing racks, which are just massive. We have one in the museum that you saw that went to the ceiling, and that was just a fraction of what they actually were in terms of the size. And so they would have to be moved by cranes, and at the very bottom is where the atomic weapon would be. And so coming off of that rack, this metal rack, would be all these wires and cables. So as they load it into the vertical hole, all those wires and cables would go off to where the scientific equipment would be. And they had milliseconds in order to capture all this data until everything got vaporized and turned into and created a cavity underground.
So we talked a little bit about the yield and how, they went way big and decided to not go that big anymore. Were the yields starting to decrease over time, or did they still try to go as big as they could and just try to refine the explosiveness of it?
So yeah, underground, especially with the concerns about you don't want to release any radiation from these tests, they were much smaller in comparison to the atmospheric or above ground tests. So and also Nevada test site and as a whole was they detonated a lot less in terms of yield as to the Pacific testing. So they didn't oftentimes reach anywhere close to what was done in the Pacific. So and then when they moved underground, it went even smaller. And we did have some large ones out there, but nothing compared to the Pacific. But yeah, they were really conscious about not wanting to release any radiation. And they also learned too from moving underground that they actually got better data from it. So they were expecting it to not give as good of results, but because everything is contained, they were actually able to get more information from it. So they were able also to test more often because everything's underground and they're all, everything's protected. So you don't have to worry so much about weather patterns and things like that. They of course had to take things into account, but they were able to test more frequently. So when you look into the 70s in terms of the amount of testing going on, it's actually, they're testing quite a bit.
I saw a presentation in the museum. It seemed to me like they collected enough data that they no longer even need to do physical testing. They could do testing digitally now if they needed to.
And that's one of the things that the test site does. Absolutely. So we were talking about how security is something that they're very focused on out there. And one of that is stockpile stewardship. And this idea of making sure our stockpile of weapons are able to be maintained without having to test these nuclear weapons, are able to test components of the weapon to make sure that they're able to operate. And then you also have where they can have subcritical experiments, which is able to test the like you said, able to test using all the what they know about testing through the technology that we have, through the science that we understand. They can actually determine through subcritical experiments, they can do the small scale experiments, and then they can multiply that based on how it would be in real life on a different scale. So yeah, they absolutely still do all of that stuff today, but just in a different way.
The mission continues in a different capacity, but it still continues out there. One other thing that I wanted to mention, I didn't put this in my notes, but the test site was also had a key role in developing the propulsion engines for spacecraft.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, they were working on developing through the NERVA program. They were developing, it started in the 60s, but they wanted to see if you could create a nuclear propulsion system. And so it went through different iterations, but the science behind it was it would create a much more, you could get further, much more power behind it. Unfortunately, the combination of public concerns and the funds were going away as well. And you also had the fact that we eventually got to the moon without it. So it sort of got shelved. But they knew that they discovered that you could use nuclear power to propel a rocket ship into space. What the plan would have been is that they would launch out into space with your standard propulsion system, but when you got into space, you'd be able to use that nuclear powered engine to then go even further. So the idea of going to Moon and Mars, and so yeah, the new NERVA rocket engine, or the NERVA rocket program, we actually have a one of our distinguished lecture series that we do. We have one of them is about that on our YouTube channel that you can check out. Talks about the program itself, and it's a fascinating dive into this really something that we don't talk a lot about, but it's something that you might actually see a lot of the companies that are pushing to space and going beyond Moon and Mars. You might actually see them start implementing something like this, because the science behind it was sound. It was just a matter of do we have the right materials for it? Do we have the need for it? So you could always see it come back. It's a possibility.
I do want to share a story. Just recently, somebody that I barely even know, who is a distant cousin of mine, informed me that his father used to work out there at the test site. His name was Andrew Wyman, and he worked for General Atomic. You familiar with that company?
Yes.
So he worked at the test site for General Atomic, and he worked on designing the high-speed instrumentation necessary to measure the short-lived particles from the underground nuclear tests. And apparently he wrote some notes before he passed away, which was only 2 years ago. And I would have loved to have talked to him about that. But I'm looking forward to digging into those notes to see what he had written down about his experiences out there.
And yeah, absolutely. That's incredible. And make sure to let us know what you come up with, because we're always looking for, we very much like to keep a record of different people who've worked on this stuff and try to have little histories and things like that. So we're always looking for donations and information about people who worked on this, because we really want to keep their memory alive as well.
Definitely. Absolutely. So we talked about how significant the Nevada test site was to the efforts of the Cold War. And in the late 80s, early 90s, there's a lot of dispute as to when the Cold War actually ended. But I have some key dates that I'd like to mention right here that were leading up to the end of the Cold War actually officially being over. November 1989, the Berlin Wall comes down. You mentioned that you guys have a good chunk of that wall, which is awesome. That was awesome to see, and it's right there at the end, and you don't even realize it. It's probably a spoiler that we gave that out and said that's in there.
We definitely don't want anybody to miss it. That's for sure.
Yes, for sure, because it is kind of tucked away as you're exiting, and if you don't look for it, you could miss it. Then in December of '91 is when the USSR officially collapses. They were going through financial turmoil. Their economy was in a shambles. They were going through political turmoil. There was a coup attempted against Gorbachev at that time. He managed to retain power, but his power was significantly reduced. And the USSR was in its death throes at that point. October 2nd, 1992, there was the final moratorium on nuclear testing went into effect. And that's leads us up to today, because there has been no sanctioned nuclear tests since that date.
Yes, in terms of what the United States, we haven't tested a nuclear weapon above ground, underground, anything like that since that moratorium was passed.
And I believe Russia has honored that agreement as well. Now, if you got a couple more minutes, I'd like to talk about the SALT agreement, because that's coming up. Is that what it's called, SALT?
The strategic. Let me double check the actual acronyms. We get a lot of acronyms. Let me see. One thing I did want to mention while we were talking about it is it was 1958 that there was a limited moratorium on testing, and that was broken prior to the limited test ban treaty, and that's what started up testing it again. So there was a short moratorium of testing that started in 58 to the early 60s, and then like I said, the Soviet Union broke that, and then we started testing as well, and that led into the 1963 limited test ban treaty. And in terms of SALT, the strategic arms limitation talks, that's what I was trying to think of.
Yes, that's the one.
Yeah.
That is due to expire this year or at the beginning of 2020 sometime. I mean 2021. And there's really no confirmation as to what's going to happen after that expires. What are your thoughts on that?
So I know personally, I hope it'll be continued. It's one of the things that we've talked about throughout this podcast episode, where wanting to make sure that they're not used, that the amount that we have is curtailed, make sure that the countries that have these weapons are limiting their numbers. So I hope that's something that they'll continue. But it's you never know. The world is an interesting place sometimes, but from on a personal standpoint, I would hope that it would be continued, and that one, we don't see nuclear testing happen again. I know that's been a discussion that people have been having about should we start up testing again, and I doubt it will happen, but you hope that they continue to curtail nuclear weapons, to continue to not test nuclear weapons as we did from 1945 to 1992. But you never know, and that's what I think makes our museum so important, is that we talk about that story, we talk about the what we've learned, and why we shouldn't use these weapons. And we help, I think, flesh out a lot of these news stories that people hear, whether it's, are we going to start testing weapons again? Nuclear weapons again? Are we going to we're going to stop, being involved in curtailing nuclear weapons. And we're important because we can give a lot of historical context to that. And because we find a huge boost to our attendance whenever there's North Korea in the news, or you hear about nuclear reactors, or like Fukushima, we get a lot of uptick in our attendance because you mentioned this at the beginning of the episode. There's your interest in this started from fear, and there's fear, I think, when it comes to these nuclear weapons, no question. So we're able to really add some background to that, and hopefully take away some of that fear, and just inform. And my personal belief is I think we'll continue curtailing, and we won't go into another arms race. At least that's my hope.
The problem is, if it does expire, then it's open season on testing again. My question is, why would either the Soviet, or they're Russia now, but why would Russia or the U.S. begin testing again if that was the case?
So I think it's no surprise to people that over the last few years, the relationship between the two countries has definitely worsened, and the tensions have increased. And I think, once again, going back to the Cold War and how these are all connected, you have that distrust again. You have that fear from both sides about what might they do, and that knee-jerk reaction is to say, then we're going to have a deterrent. And hopefully what we'll see is that they'll recognize this, and they'll realize that the best way to move forward is to agree to limit what our armament is and what our stockpile is. But I think what it comes down to is that with the worsening relationship, you have a lot of fear, a lot of animosity, and that's when you start wondering, are they living up to their end? Are they going to try to do this? Are they going to try to do that? And that's what leads to the arms race.
Yeah. And that is where the problem lies.
We talked about this with Mad throughout this conversation, which has been incredible, is that it's all about that distrust is what creates the need for this, or I shouldn't say the need, the reaction that we take. And I think if we focus on improving relationship between our countries, that it's only going to lead us into a better situation where we hopefully never have to test nuclear weapons again, and we hopefully don't want to increase our stockpile, because I don't believe that it serves either country.
Further testing of any kind is not productive in any way. It's not going forward, it's going backwards, and that's not the direction we want to go. So it's been a great conversation, Joe, and I want to respect your time. We've been at this for quite a while. And so what I'd like to do now is close it out with your final thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. And definitely want to respect your time too. And I've had a wonderful time talking with you, and it's flown by, that's for sure. The time has just flown by. But with our conversations about Russia and the United States and what the future holds, what it comes down to is, this quote from Einstein when he said, "The splitting of the atom changed everything except the way we think." No matter how advanced we become, there's that fear. And that's really what motivated nuclear testing, and what brings up this discussion now about the future of SALT. So, but what I want to say is that I hope everybody will take the time to check out our website, nationalatomictestingmuseum.org. Plan their visit to come check us out. I'd love to meet with any of them if they come to the museum. We have shortened hours right now. We're open Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday from 10 to 3. Normally, we're open 7 days a week, 10 to 5. and then Sunday we were 12 to 5. So right now we've changed our hours, but hopefully people will plan their visit, come check us out. We've been taking precautions. Our staff wear masks and gloves, and we wipe down all the surfaces with, and we disinfect. So we've been taking those precautions. But I do want to thank you so much for having me. I want to share that we do have an upcoming exhibit about Trinity. I know we've been discussing that a lot today. And we will also be focusing on what we talked about with the experience of those in Japan who experienced the attack on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We are working with the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum to have a testimonial from one of the survivors. We're not quite sure which location they experienced it at, but they actually experienced one of the atomic bombs that was dropped on Japan, and they're going to share what they felt with, what they saw, their experience, and we want to highlight that side of it. We've done one similar to that several years ago at this point, highlighting it. And so, like I said, working with the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum to have a testimony of one of the survivors. The last time we did it, you could hear a pin drop. So we take it seriously that we want to share all sides of the story. The reason for dropping it, but also understanding that there were horrors that the Japanese people experienced.
Excellent closing statement about Einstein and what he said. Such a profound statement and so accurate and quite prescient too. I mean, I think that he foresaw more than he was given credit for. I think the guy was brilliant, and he gave so much to the world. We're eternally grateful for that. Yeah, and as far as your work and the work out at the Nevada test site, extremely important, crucial that the mission continues, and what the museum does. I'm amazed that the upcoming events that you guys have, the 75th anniversary of the Trinity shot or the Trinity test, and the 75th anniversary of Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
It's something that we take seriously, that role that we have to show both sides of it, and to understand that something can be beneficial to one country but also detrimental to another, and that nuclear weapons, like anything, if in the right hands, can be useful. It can be a deterrent to war. We saw it with the Cold War, but at the same time, though, it can be used to destroy. And I think whether you're on one side or the other, it's important to understand that no one wants to see these bombs being used. So we need to make sure that we're giving a voice to those people who've seen firsthand what it can do. So we do have some upcoming events. We have Richard Rhodes, who is a renowned author, going to be talking about Oppenheimer, and about the mystery and the myth of that individual. We talked a little bit about him today, and so his lecture, which is on July 16th, is going to be talking about Oppenheimer, and he's a renowned author. He's a winner of a Pulitzer Prize for Making of the Atomic Bomb, which is one of the most referenced books about the Manhattan Project. So he's definitely someone we're excited to have, and that's going to be via Zoom. And so we have all that information on our website. We also going to have Dr. Brent Park, who is with the Nevada National Security Site. So the title for Richard Rhodes is Robert Oppenheimer, The Myth and the Mystery. And that's going to be Thursday, July 16th at 6 p.m. live on Zoom. And the information is on our website for that, how to register. And we also, on July 30th, which is also a Thursday, we're going to have another Zoom talk with Dr. Brent Park. It's more going to be conversational. He is the Deputy Administrator for the Defense Nuclear Nonproliferation at the National Nuclear Security Administration, the NNSA, which oversees the Nevada National Security Site. And so when we're talking about stockpiled stewardship earlier, he's the guy who oversees that. And so, the Deputy Administrator for that. So he can talk a lot about areas of stockpiled stewardship, discussions about the work that's being done to make sure that we're not taken off guard, and we have our stockpile ready to go. And then, of course, I mentioned that we do have the Trinity exhibit opening on July 16th, along with our Richard Rhodes lecture. And then on August 6th, I believe, is when we're having the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum talk about the survivor testimonial. And so it's going to be $5 to check it out. And the Brent Park one, Dr. Park, is going to be free. But Richard Rhodes and the testimonial and all of those are going to be $5. But that gets you in to be able to check out, and you can ask questions and chat, and we could make sure to get him to answer any of those questions.
And the exhibition for the Trinity test is on site, right?
Yep, it's going to be in our theater that we have when you first enter the museum. That's not going to be any additional extra cost. So museum admission will get you into that exhibit, and it talks about all the different sites, like we're talking about Oak Ridge, Hanford, Los Alamos, the reason for the Manhattan Project being created, then all throughout the science, technology, all the moving pieces that were involved.
And with that, I don't have anything else for you, Joe. If you have nothing else, I think we can call it a day.
Absolutely. And thank you for taking so much time out of your day. I really appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. My pleasure. I mean, appreciate your time. And hey, if you're up for it, maybe again in the future, we can do it again.
I'm always happy to make time, and thank you for making time to have me again.
Thanks again, Joe. I'll talk to you soon.
Appreciate it.
Take care.
Talk soon. Bye.
Dead Hand Radio is a podcast about the Cold War, its history, and the effects it had on our culture, technology, and the future of our world. My goal is to examine these and other topics and guide listeners and guests of the show on a journey of mind-expanding contemplation, to learn, to educate, to entertain, and exchange ideas with those interested. So join me, and together we'll explore a fascinating period of history and examine some incredible advancements in weapons, technology, science, art, and culture, and discuss how all of it relates to the future of our world. If you or someone you know has knowledge about the Cold War or any other topics we discuss on this program, please get in touch and let's talk. It could be a great conversation for a future episode, and I'm especially interested to talk with anyone who has first-hand knowledge of these topics. If you have questions or comments, drop me an email or visit deadhandradio.com. You can also find me on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Dead Hand Radio is part of the SIP network, a group of high-energy, positive-minded individuals providing a resource for listeners with a variety of podcasts, from entertainment and education to motivation and inspiration for your daily routine. Visit sipnet.us and learn more about these excellent podcasts. I'm Andrew Hall, and this is Dead Hand Radio. Thanks for listening.